Intxaurrak eta urrak ikusi genituen azokan zakuka saltzen. Baita ehiztariek botatako egabera, uxo eta
He's reading a piece of poetry, and we'll start translating for the conference, not for the poetry. Sorry.
Loreen sailean krisantemoak ziren nagusi, eta lirioak. Tomaterik ez daukat, leka eta piperra aukeran gutxi, esan zigun baserritarrak buruko pañelua ondo kokatuz. Baina porruak edo gaztainak nahi izan ezkero ugari. Itxinituen begiak. Erbiak basoan zebiltzan jauzik eta korrika, elkarri keinuak eginez, antzerki batean bezala. Eta egabera bat, Granadako Fray Luisek zioen moduan, zauritu itxura egin, eta bakar-bakarrik zijoan ibai ertzetik ehiztariak erakarri, eta bere kideen etzalekutik desbideratzeko. Multzoka uxoek egoranzko lerroari eusten zioten tinko. Irekin nituen begiak. Ego haizea kosto bat zeraman errestan. Hotza eta euria izan genituen urrena joan ginenean. Eta 20 bat arkume zeuden hileran jarrita, eta hankatxoak Zurbaranen Agnus Dei koadroan bezala loturik zituztela. Lore izegokienez, kamelia zen azoka guztian bakarra. Baina haren pare zebilen arro eta apain, kolore moreko aza. Arrandegietan distira egiten zuten milaka antxoen sabelek, eta asko ziren alaberzua landareak, ala baratzekoak, sagar, gerezi, intxaur, gaztaina, piku edo aran emaileak, nola basokoak, aritzak eta pagoak, pinuak eta urkiak. Baserritarrak esan zuen, ez dut aldi batean Granadarik izango, baina hilarrak nahi badituzu hementxe dauzkat, goxo askoak. Begiak itxi, eta Mateoren hitzak etorri zitzaizkidan gogora. Begira, arkumeak otso artean bezala bidaltzen zaituztet, izan zaitezte basugea bezain zuhurrak, eta uixoa bezain lauak. Irekin nituen begiak. Oinetakoetan, kaskabar pinportak neuzkan. Azokara bidean berriro, nartzisoak eta mimosak ikusi genituen etxeatarietan. Eta astotxo bat ere bai, saskiak gazta berriz beteta, oraindik Francis Jamesen garaietan bizi bagina bezalaxe. Heldu ginen, eta faisaiaren arrautzak zeuden salga itxitatzeko, eta frambuesaz egindako marmelada kontzi handi eta txikietan. Zenbait posturen paretik pasatzean, usain goxoa sentitzen zen, mendarena batzuetan, mihiluarena edo arrosarena besteetan, eta haiekin nahaztuta, arrotz eta arro, baratxuri freskoarena. Baserritarrak esan zuen, denetik daukatia, nahi duzuena eskatu. Marrubi, gerezi, San Juan Sagar, aran hori, aran gorri, musika, tomate, babarron, tipu, lale, kalkatxofa, letxuga, erremolatxa, hilarrak gutxi alere, eta ondjoak kaskarrak, eta gereziak berdin. Bernardo Atxagaren egunak badoaz idazlanaren pasartea. Existe una pulsión y una necesidad que se está viendo plasmada en el cambio de las vidas asfixiadas y alienadas en las grandes urbes, donde se alistan en fila como hormigas en cada hora punta tras salir del vagón correspondiente de camino al trabajo. Y así 5 días a la semana. Y así durante todo el año. Y así durante toda una vida. Y eso en caso de tener un trabajo estable. Sin duda, estamos ante una automatización de las vidas redirigida a la producción y al cumplimiento de horarios y deberes que se llevan gran parte del día y del tiempo del que disponemos. Entroncando esto con la precariedad laboral y generalizada, así como con la pérdida de rumbo, esperanza y de estímulos, tanto en las ciudades como en localidades más pequeñas, la naturaleza, y especialmente los bosques, se erige como el fuerte donde sanar muchas taras, carencias y necesidades que quedan latentes en las vidas comprimidas por el cumplimiento de unos horarios férreos y de unas responsabilidades. Una vorágine en la que desaparecen los espacios propios, donde escuchar la voz interior o poder establecer contacto visual y emocional con todo lo que nos rodea, que al fin y al cabo es la naturaleza. Fragmento del lenguaje de los bosques del autor Hasier Larretxea. Eta orain, Hasier eta Bernardo Atxaga oraintxe gurekin izango dira, Karmele Jaiorekin.
Now we are going to listen to Hasier Larretxea and Bernardo Atxaga talking with Karmele Jaio.
Bueno, arratsaldeon. Azteko modu oberik, Iñaki Beratxeri eskerrak benetan, hain hitzei oraindik edertasun gehiago emateagatik. Bueno, arratsaldeon Bernardo, arratsaldeon Hasier, zaudete. Natura eta literatura da, gaur mai gainean dugun gaia egunotan hemen aritzen den gai hau. Erretzar askotatik
Days in this festival on literature. These are subject matters that could be confronted from different point of views. So we'll see their different approaches. So to start with, I'd like to know what's the sway of nature both in your work and in your lives. It is very relevant. It appears both nature and other elements from nature in your work. So what is your relationship like with nature? As a person, as a writer, how do you relate to nature? Shall I start? Says Atxaga. Well, good afternoon. To answer your question, I'd like to talk about how we work with landscape and nature in literature. So shortly, I could say, since you're also readers, you've realized that in literature we work with three types of geographies, landscapes, and natures. Three types that are perceived almost instantly. It is very easy to know of what nature writers are talking about. So one is like the one of the Ethiopia from Thomas Morrow. It's not a real place. There is a castle, there are some streets, but it's not real, really. There are no place names. It is not like a Michelin map. Then the other kind of landscape would be the one used by Stevenson in his Treasure Island. It is an imaginary place, but Stevenson, he sort of locates that in a very remote place, so we can't really believe that there are pirates in that island. And also talking about place names, or toponymy, only few names are mentioned. This is like combining the fact that the landscape is remote but also very close, and that makes it be more real. And I am going to be short. Do not stress out, Karmele. And then to a girl was asked to write a tale. And she wrote a tale that went something like, in the 13th century in Bilbao, there was an airport. And then the teacher said, no, in the 13th century, you cannot talk about an airport, rewrite it. So in England, in the 13th century, they came in a helicopter, and the teacher still was saying, no, it is the 13th century, you cannot say that. So she rewrote it and said, in Japan, in the 13th century, a helicopter arrived, and then the student said, like, I cannot go any farther. So what does it show? Well, what it shows is that often writers, they use geography and nature to try to be loyal to reality, as Stevenson did in his Treasure Island. And then William Faulkner, if you pay attention to the map that he would make or produce, there he would say, here dined, here fell off a horse, a tenant, whatsoever. And here lived sisters, this and that. So it is about landscape that he knows. And this is a combination of territory and memory. What do I mean by this? I used to say that I really like Faulkner's approach, but also Stevenson's and Thomas Moreau's approach as well. So I am moving on, I am evolving in my loves. What I mean is that on how we use nature and landscape, we can see an essential tool of this métier, of this craftsman that is writing. Nature always pays a service to literature. Well, hello, it is a pleasure to be here. Bernardo and Karmele, hello. Thanks for the organizers, and thank you for all of you. Thank you to all of you for attending. For 12 years now, I live in Madrid. And to me, nature is related to my origins, to my hometown. It is like a way to communicate with my origins. And in this city where I live, I miss many things. My father, he is a wood cutter, aizkolari in Basque, and that was my environment. I was born in Baztan, and I've always been in direct contact with the wood, with the forest. I was brought up to be an aizkolari myself, that is a Basque woodcutter. My father really tried hard. So, to me, the presence of nature in my literature follows sort of Faulkner's approach. This is about talking about that legacy that sort of is related to the axe and to maybe tools that I am not using directly myself to cut wood, but I am using those tools by means of literature. And it is a very vast and rich universe. And I've learned a lot from this rural world. And I think this is kind of a way to pay homage to nature and a way also to go back to my roots somehow. Yes, as you've mentioned, she says, in your work we see animals and plants and landscape, different elements from nature. In your work, Bernardo, they always play a symbolic role. Well, do they have, I'd rather ask it, do they play a symbolic role? Do you use nature as a tool to express something? It is not just a way to merely describe things. Bernardo says, well, I'd like to remind you that in my hometown, there is a piece of a sculpture, and if you ever go there, you see that 100 meters before you get into the village, there is a sculpture. And when you look at it from a distance, you think that the name is the man and the woman. But as you come closer, you realize that both they have tools to work the land. And the piece of a sculpture that from a distance meant like a man and a woman, you can like think of your wife, of your mom, of that love, that impossible love that you had. And suddenly when you come closer, what you really see there, it's a tool that is used by farmers, just like a plow. So what do I mean by this? Often, the issue is not about adding too many details about a piece of landscape or about nature, but rather to choose what details you're going to focus on, depending on the meaning you want to, or the message you want to convey. Like in my book, Baba, if you've read this book, not even one time, not even once is City Council mentioned. But on the other hand, it is very important at the tailor's shop, and I mention it often. So I underline what I want to talk about. Well, so why a tailor's shop? Well, in a small village, to young children, that was a very important place because there is where all the girls would go, because most girls would work at the tailor's shop. So when I was young, that shop was a very interesting place for boys because most of the girls were dressmakers. And it is not easy to see girls in a small town, so you have to go there to see them. So when you mention this tailor's shop, you know that that is going to be important and it's going to have a symbolic meaning. It is not about a place where people are sort of making dresses. No, it is a place where things are going to happen. When I wrote the book, Two Brothers, also one of the boys, he's handicapped, he's kind of crazy. Then when he goes crazy, what does he do? Well, he runs away. He always go hide in the tailor shop among the girls. So this is why when I write, if you remove some details, it is better. You sort of convey more of a meaning, and you can also put more content in your writing. And I'm going to talk about another case. It is a Basque writer. Usually, in the works where there are many details, I think usually they try to defend a piece of landscape, like Txomin Agirre, for example, in Cresala. We saw him defending some landscape, thinking that that landscape was the landscape that the Catholic religion needed, and that's why it was very detailed. But I think that is a kind of literature that is not convenient to do now in these times. Well, Hasier says, yes, it is true from that point of view. And when you talk about the elements in nature, I think that meaning that some elements acquire is important. And I think in the language of the forest, in that book, when I was talking to Moncho Armendariz, because in his film, I like the coal miners that he was mentioning in the region of Navarra, and I like the landscape and also to what details he was paying attention, how the forest and nature were important in that work. And also, as Bernardo was saying, I think it is true that we are in very deep contexts. And there we have all those many elements to play with, and with which you can really create a symbology and do chiaro oscuro. And I think how you look at it is very important. So as a writer, you make the decision on how you're going to be using those elements in order to express what you aim at expressing, what you want to give to the reader. And it is true that those elements might vary, and the work might also change or evolve according to what you decide to use. May I add something, says Bernardo? Yeah, sure. I'd like to provide you with some details. Often, one has the impression that some elements are stronger, like a window in a picture or in literature. It is usually stronger than a cup. Usually, a window has many more meanings. It is related to things that people go through, and we've got many in mind, many images of a window. And I wanted to say this because, of course, a writer might invent some symbols, but also this comes from a tradition. So it is already given to us. And the clear case is snakes. Snakes in our environment used to be fear, used to mean fear in every legend. They would tell you, well, snakes come at night and they get the milk out of the cow's breast, and nobody will be able to then touch that cow. So we were told these kind of stories. And I think this comes from the Christian environment where we've been brought up. And the snakes in the Christian religion always means, well, the bad things. It means evil is why we were sort of thrown from paradise. And maybe in other countries, snakes do not have that negative meaning. And that is what you use because you know there is a meaning there. So she asks, do you think that those symbols we get from tradition are stronger as a symbol than those that might come out of a personal experience? You've mentioned the dressmakers that mean that you went to see the girls when you were young. So that's important to you because it is related to your life. Well, I said, in your case, in your work, you talk about the neighborhood and about nature, and always linked to an internal voice. It seems that that is what gives you the key to connect with your internal voice. Yes, says Hasier. Nature to me is really powerful. Nature, forests. And that sort of provides me that urge to write, those myths that you've mentioned. You've mentioned, well, the Christian religion, and also, you know, also paganism and all these sort of wild element in forest. What I've learned from my father, he would go into the forest for months and live there and experience things there. And it is true that in my work, I am related to those elements. And I think the forest, the nature are really very rich spaces with their chiaroscuro and with their shortcuts. And I think that these elements, well, people, childhood, Catholic education that we've received, morals, rules, the different paths you follow, how you find yourself, identity, to allow yourself to be who you are and accept yourself as you are. I think all this is very useful to me to talk through metaphors. I might talk about a bird's flight. So I use these as metaphors. And this is always from my personal experience. And my childhood has sort of given me many elements that I didn't really know about until I moved to a city. And I've seen different reactions. So it is true that in my particular case, at least, I think I have that approach that all this is something really basic to be in the world. Karmele says that she sees like a teacher at a school telling, now you speak, now you speak. Well, Bernardo says that I've got to acknowledge that I am half deaf. So this is why I always tend to look at Karmele to see whether I can speak. Yes, on how to relate personal experiences, that is always very personal and particular and special. How to relate this experience to those elements that come from a tradition like snakes and so on. I think that both in literature and in most of the things we do, I think a metaphor will help us understand this link. And this is how do you learn to write? And this, I mean, how you learn to write, basic writing, not literature. There is an alphabet, and there is a way to produce those letters. So if you do calligraphy, little by little, you learn to draw those letters, how to put them together. And that's not your own writing, because if you go to a particular school, your writing will look very much like all your colleagues in the classroom. But little by little, you end up developing your own style in writing. And years later, how you write shows how you feel. It is not the same if you're 50 or 80, you don't write the same. It also sort of shows how your body is. It's something very personal and particular. And what I mean by this is that those letters, those alphabets that come from the tradition, I try to use them to express my personal experience. I might talk about snakes, and does it mean that I am talking about Christians? Well, you know, there is things that come from tradition, and sometimes when you are in a certain situation, when you feel you are suffering, then you can convey that image. And there are some ideas that are there. And I'd like to finish with another symbol, like a tomb and a butterfly. They're related. The butterfly is the spiritual experience that goes beyond death. This is why usually a tomb is represented with a flying butterfly, or with a butterfly flying over it. So there are always this kind of elements, both that come from the Christian religion or from the latest films, if we've got to be sincere. Now I am working in a text, and the reference is the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I am working with those symbols because I know everybody sort of knows by heart that soundtrack, and everybody knows the alphabet. We all share that. So you learn. One can learn to write, she says. And same as you learn to write, do you have the impression that you also learn to relate to nature? Yeah, I think that is something that we learn. We are taught to look at nature and to the landscape. It is not something that we are born with. And I think this happened through history, first in paintings. Then the Flemish came with their landscape, and they educated people in this way to perceive differently the landscape. It was the first time ever people were perceiving landscape as such. There is a huge difference in between perceiving nature as the place where we find the food, or the place where our house sits, or rather thinking it is something that we admire. For example, in the past, in the Tour de France, there used to be a stage and there were different carpenters that would go with the bikers constantly working. And none of them would say, well, it was a beautiful afternoon, and then we would see the stars appearing at night time. But they didn't have that kind of approach. But it seems it was through painting that in the 19th century is when people start admiring and perceiving nature as a place to admire, like something that we admire. And I swear I'm going to finish with this. When we create a landscape, when nature turns into something that is admired, well, let's see, we end up inventing the walks. People didn't used to go for a walk. There is a very well-known book by Rousseau, and he talks about a lonely walker, the dreams, the reveries of a lonely walker. And he was not walking on his own. This is something very modern, to go for a walk, to walk on your own. That is something not very common. Even maybe nowadays it is better to walk your dog, so you have an excuse to go for a walk, because otherwise they think you're weirdo. So, well, that's what I mean, you know, it's something that you learn about. Well, Hasier, he learned from his father, he didn't say it. His father is a very well-known wood cutter, Larretxea, an aizkolari, that is a woodcutter in Basque. And then maybe he kept on learning through readings at a school, through different theories. So you little by little learn to relate to nature. And the more you know, the more you contemplate in a renovated and precise way nature. I think the first thing one should say, or that I want to say about nature, it's something that was said by one of my grandmas. And she would say that Luther was very unfortunate, and she was a reactionary, because somebody told Luther, there is a sky full of stars. And as he was a Protestant, he said, yes, but that sky is not for us. So it is very beautiful, sky full of starry sky. And to me, it was really a revolution, what my grandma told me, that you can sort of stare at the sky and pay attention to the stars. Yeah, so maybe you can learn from your close landscape. Maybe now that you've moved away from it, now you're closer precisely to your landscape, Hasier. Well, when Bernardo was Atxaga was talking, precisely I was talking about that geographical and emotional distance that really made me observe those elements in a different way, that allowed me to really approach nature and the landscape in a different way. My father is a very well-known and popular Aizkolari, and when I was a teenager, he's been trying to educate me on those values, and I was not aware of everything I was learning from my father, everything he was teaching me. My father, he's really a man of the forest. And well, I was like a village boy, and for me, it was very difficult to really understand all that. My father, he's an Aizkolari, and life took him there. And he's very courageous. And what he's been teaching me has been useful to me. But it is true that that geographical distance now has made me look the forest and the different paths in a different way. And as a writer, I have a different relationship, a different way to talk to those landscapes, to those elements. And I've been able to understand those silences with that, thanks to that distance. And in my latest book, I really sort of plunge into those forests. Since I am living in downtown Madrid, I really think about all these very differently. So nature is like a resistance, a way to do resistance, because we now have all these issues like the climate change, global warming, pollution. So there are many elements that are interrelated and that have been really useful to me with this distance, and that have been really helpful. I think you sort of took some distance to look at your hometown. Well, yes, now that we are talking about Larretxea, often I've seen Larretxea, well, his father, cutting wood. So acting as an Aizkolari. So we've said previously that one learns to look at nature, and this brought an image to my mind that I really like. It is a scene where there is a woodcutter, an Aizkolari, and he is cutting wood, he's cutting logs, and by him there is a man with a little stake saying, here, there. And to me, that is fascinating. How that person that is indicating him where to give this, to hit next, If you've never seen that, I mean, that guy with the thin stick, it's amazing. I mean, he's always there, here, there, and the wood log cutter always obeys him. Yes, it is funny, you know, you can tell who's been cutting a log because they all cut them in different ways. So you go there, you have a look at the log, and you know who was the aizkolari that cut it. And depending on the specificities of every aizkolari, they might cut the log in a way or another. That is very interesting. Yes, really. Yes, about Days of Snow, that book, I feel sorry that I didn't bring that line from Ashular that says that the one that goes away from his home for a certain time has his head sort of twisted looking at his hometown. And then suddenly he looks front and never again thinks of his hometown. And I think this is quite true, though. But I'd like to answer you. Well, you also sort of educate yourself to look at things in a particular way. For example, when they took me to the desert in Nevada, often the American Basques would take me to the desert in Nevada. And even if you've never read about the desert has an impact on you, and romantics already mentioned this. There is this sublime quality of the desert. It is overwhelming. You go into the desert and you see an endless land where there is no life. It's as if you were made of iron, and then they would put a magnet in front of you, and the appeal is immediate. And romantics would think about this sort of a physical thing that you feel. Sometimes it is very scary. It depends on how you feel. But also it means joy, joy because of the beauty of the desert. And I remember that that would happen to me in the desert. And I'm going to tell you something more private since we are here among friends. I think that this image of the desert is very useful to understand the power of a landscape. We would travel through Arizona, through the desert. There was nothing right, nothing left, nothing around. And we were concerned. Our children, they were very young, and we were concerned because we didn't want them to sort of awake and feel a physical shock as we did. So they woke up, and we were playing with them, and good parents do, and we would start playing, what do I see? So I would go, I see, well, what do you see? And they would say, I don't see anything at all around here, apart from the C from cielo in Spanish, so S from sky, or T for tierra, L for land. There was nothing. So this, game about what do you see, it was like about the things we had inside the car, really. So this is what we were saying previously. When there are no details, then you realize that you are in an allegoric landscape as such, with nothing added. And then you add your dreams, your thoughts to that landscape. But what you have there is nothing, yes, land, yes, earth. And I met a Mexican writer at the time, and he wrote a lot about the desert. And he would tell me, once you've seen a desert, every kind of, no matter what piece of landscape, it seems just like a set. And it is true to me, when I went into the desert first time, it was like a physical shock. And then also I felt some kind of protection or shelter, and also it was like a refuge to me. And then when I was thinking of how to find shelter there, I was thinking of my hometown where I was born. And more I am convinced that where you've been brought up, where you spent your childhood, is really powerful to you. My refuge, when I was scared at the desert, were my memories, the memories I had from my childhood village. We usually say that somebody is from where they've been to primary school, and that's not my case, though. Well, Hasier, in your book, you also talk about childhood. It's a very clear element in your book.
Aizkolari australiarrak ikusi nituen bortzurterekin, aur bat nintzela, eta badaude oso
Yes, when I was 5, I saw some Australian aizkolaris in San Sebastian, and there were very nice pictures there. There was my father there smiling, and I had the axe, and I was pretending I was sort of lifting this big stone. Well, yeah, there are things that are very powerful from your childhood. And all those things are good to me, are useful for me to work in my literature. I really like memoirs where people talk about their lives. And this is about how I went back to my father, to my family name, to my environment. And this was a happy sort of reunion with my family and with peace. Because some people, they do as you said. They leave their hometown, they sort of, for a while, look backwards, but then they start looking front and never ever think of their hometown again. But this is kind of a personal elaboration that you have to go through, and sometimes you re-encounter your ghost, and then you sort of think back of your family and everything that you knew in your childhood. Well, she says, Hasier, in your book, you talk about a knowledge that is related to nature. Do you think we're more and more ignorant in the relation to nature, that we know less and less about nature? Like city people, we just say a tree or a bird because we don't know what kind of a tree it is or what kind of bird we're talking about or we're seeing. Well, might be, as Hasier says, even though I've been taught how to take care of every tree, the name of every tree, but I didn't pay attention. Didn't pay attention as I should. So as a society, we don't really pay attention to trees, to this kind of environment, and to how important they are, because we have to sort of obey to some kind of time schedules. And I think worldwide we follow that trend. Most people in 30 years will be living in a city. And so there is this trend globally, you know, to move away from nature. I think we are running that risk of no longer knowing or losing some of the professions that were related to taking care of woods, and so on. So maybe we need to approach them consciously, but in forest there are different elements that might help us well put an end to some of the imbalances that we've got to face nowadays. I don't know how to say this. It is always good to have a friend that studied botanics, and I am not joking, Bernardo says. Because I've said previously that we learn to you always need somebody to guide you in life. It is fundamental. And sometimes that guide, that mentor, might be somebody that might be a botanist, somebody that knows botany. So with a friend of mine that studied botany, we went for a walk with him, and it was great then to go for a walk. He would tell you all the names of every plant and explain you the difference in between different plants. And then when I read about that subject, I realized that beautiful books have been written on nature, on walks. There are all writers like Rousseau that wrote about nature, and they knew a lot. They were not only poets, they were also experts in nature. It is true that poetry resides in details, and these writers, they knew details. About details, they were... Because if you cannot tell a detail, then what you are missing is full of stereotypes, and you might really end up producing a very empty or void image of nature. And this is the case with any kind of profession. If you approach a carpenter, then it is amazing how they talk about their trade, about their job. The trade, a métier, is something very beautiful. And it's something we cannot sort of get out of our lives, because it is really beautiful to be with somebody that really is an expert on something, you know? So you always need somebody to guide you, even to learn to read. If you don't have a good memory, you will not be a good reader. You're very likely not to be a good reader. What I've learned about nature and about landscape, I've done so through my friends, through some people that have been sort of guiding me. I don't know how to put this. That is how I've learned. Because when one realizes that when you miss something and then you feel your void, your gaps with the stereotypes. So if you see a cow walking up a street in a village, and then you see that the cow is following you, and how the cow looks at you, well, those experiences you do not forget. I mean, the people that live in a village don't usually just like say, like, what a pretty cow, and caress the cow. No. You feel something else. You have a different connection with the cow. So you need somebody to guide you to get that connection. But if you do not know about wood, as Hasier says, then you might buy books that talk about wood. Yes, I know. Once I was told about how pigs were killed, the pigs slaughter, and about the noise, about the odors, about the scents. So I think that sometimes people living in a city look at forest or at villages in a very naive way. They sort of contemplate them, but also I think they have the need to go away, to move away. My father, he spent 2 months in Candanchu in the Pyrenees, taking care of animals, and he had to know how many bullets he had left in order to know how many animals he could kill to eat. And he would then kill the animals and then bury them so they will be ready to be eaten sometime later. So that used to be reality some years ago. So I think it is important that when we write, we have that knowledge, not to limit ourselves to merely contemplate superficially nature or landscapes. So I think this is why it is important to live your own experiences, to sort of be able to convey that from your own heart and from your own experience. Well, Bernardo said, I was already telling you very private things, so I was talking about that people that sort of mentor you, guide you, and on how we learn. The ideal thing will be to have Aristotle to sort of teach you. But it is difficult to have one of the great philosophers to sort of teach you and guide you. My father, he was a carpenter, and he would work with wood. And like most carpenters at the time, he had lost half of his finger. Another finger was not in a very good condition. When those things would happen to them. So he had nobody to guide him. And in a society that situation was quite normal. That was the case until I began reading a book by Kafka. Immediately in that book, there was a person, a character that had these cards with drawings where it would show some people with damaged fingers, and then the client worked for an insurance company. And then I realized, well, my father, he might get some money out of the insurance, given the situation of how his fingers are. So what I mean by this is that if you don't have a mentor, if nobody opens your eyes, well, you might not know about something, but then if they let you know about something, then you understand it very quickly. Yes, we need to be guided, but also we need somebody to take care of us, she says. I think nature shows, proves that we are interdependent. We depend on nature, we depend on other people. So within this world where we live, I think we often neglect care. And I think care, precisely, is an important piece of word. And I think it is a concept that sometimes in the financial system or in other same sense, we don't sort of grant it enough importance. Hasier says, yes, I fully agree. My father would work in a forest, and sometimes it is difficult for him to hire people to work as forest farmers. And I realized how he takes care of things, like in little details on how you've got to cut an old tree so a new tree can be born. So we don't realize that it's not enough to plant forest, to reforest an area. You have to also take care of them. So care is very important when you are forest farming, and to make the ecosystem prevail. And we can learn a lot from those people that live in the forest and related to nature. And we usually neglect that from our daily routine, and we don't make them be part of our society. And I think we should pay attention to that as a society in order to regain a certain balance. We're not aware of what forests can really offer us. This year's festival is titled Return to Nature, Utopia. Is it a utopia, literary utopia? So we now saying that nature might play a main role. What might be the way out to the present situation? Well, Bernardo says this is quite complex. This is related to financial logic. For a long time now, we live under the financial rules or logic. And when we talk about care in societies like ours, and this is still quite a traditional society, luckily, not that traditional in some other aspects, unfortunately, but in some societies like ours where families still take care of the weakest ones. And the other day I visited the archaeological site Atapuerca, and I invite you to go if you've not been there. It's amazing. Well, paleontologists there, they've found out something that is impressive. They've realized that before Homo sapiens, I don't know if it was some 700,000 years ago or something alike, they've realized that people living there, among people living there, there was a girl that had an issue in her jaw, and she could not chew and could not eat. But still, they found out that she became 14. So those people, some 700,000 years ago, took care of her so she could live up until the age of 14. Otherwise, she would have died immediately. So when you read about this, I mean, it is amazing. And you're really shocked and overwhelmed, and you realize that maybe it is something that is inherent to human beings, taking care of others. But here or in the States, care also has to fulfill some requirements, like geographical requirements or societary requirements. For example, if everybody has to work for 14 hours and just like earning a minimum wage, then it is difficult that you also can take care of somebody else. Or if you live, I don't know, because I don't want to offend anybody, if you live in Phoenix, well, to take care of people around you, well, it is difficult because in Phoenix, There's not like an urban downtown, like every house is very scattered, houses are scattered. So nowadays, there is that risk. Even though here in South Europe, we're not going to end up in those situations. I think this is due to misery, to a wrong urban planning. I think care. It is something that was real from the old age. And we now also find signs of this care sort of disappearing. Like now, hospitals are full up, so people are taken to hospital instead of being taken care of them at home mostly. Well, I think time has come for a Q&A with the audience. Well, human beings and nature. My question is that often human beings, we think we are above nature, that we are more than nature. So when we talk about what we do, we say we do good things and bad things. I think Stefano Mancuso has been here. He talks about plants and about the plants, the feelings of the plants, and about the future, that the future is going to really be green. So I always wonder what weeds think when we talk about them. As in Spanish for weeds, we say bad herb or bad grass. So when we call them bad. Sorry, I couldn't hear you, Bernardo says. So she's saying that to weed, in Spanish, we call it like bad grass. So when we sort of add a negative adjective to a plant, how would a plant feel? Well, that's easy to answer. I think plants and animals, when they are given those negative names, is because for a farmer, they're somehow negative. So we're talking about two different natures. So one is nature as food. So where we also get materials to build our houses. And then we have the nature that we observe. And we not only find weeds. If you have some crops and then suddenly a plague comes or you have weeds, then you're going to have an issue to feed your animals, for example. I studied some poems to try to analyze this. And I agree with you. There were some poems full of anger against animals, like foxes. But really, those were really hate lines against those animals. And some animals that were mentioned, I don't even know what they look like. Like, for example, polecats that ate 10 chickens from a farm. So the farmer then said, please make a poem against this animal that is really evil. So all those negative names or adjectives are related to the human's economy. Because if you just make about what you need for living, well, then you can understand it. When people, it is very hard for them to make a living, well, it's quite logical that they will hate those animals. I mean, some people just used to make a living removing sand from the Urumea River. So they will spend most of their day just with their feet in the river, sorry. And they were shoeless, and they were wearing nothing waterproof, just a regular, very simple trouser. So, I mean, some people's lives were really tough at the time. Hasier said, yes, nature teaches us, also in relation to the need to know how nature works. You have to need about the roots of a tree, how they're interconnected, how they protect each other, the importance of resin. And I think there is a whole universe that is quite unknown to us, and that I think is really valuable, and that can still teach us a lot nowadays. Yes, there is a poem by Chirrita, says Atxaga, that talks about chicken. And, well, this chicken, she's producing eggs. And out of 10 chicken, 5 will die. And that was terrible at the time. And same goes for storms or for drizzle. It would kill the crops. I remember when I used to be in my hometown that the storms were really, really strong. And when there was a very important storm approaching, we would play the bells. We will make the bells make sound to make the storm go away. Imagine what it meant to us.
Thank you for this amazing conversation, very inspiring. I wanted to ask Mr. Atxaga one question. When you talked about 3 types of landscapes, you used Moore's, Faulkner's, and Stevenson's. And one particular landscape came to my mind when you were talking about that, actually 2. T.H. Ellison's Eliot's Wasteland and Fitzgerald's Great Gatsby. And I have a feeling that we are kind of living in the time when we are heading to the Mad Max scenario and not to the lush forest. So I was wondering, where do you put this type of landscapes in literature? In what format? Like, is it a 4th kind of landscape, or is it one of these 3 that you mentioned? Thank you.
Excuse me, I'm deaf. It's impossible for me.
Inglesez entzuten zen hemen ere. Paisaiari buruz galdetu dizu, baina zehazki nik ere ez diot ulertu ondo zer zan ez zegoen hemen.
Well, I've got to say, because I was not listening to the translation, could you say it again and see if we hear the translation?
Albaduzu labur bildu, you can summarize what you said.
Well, basically, when Mr. Atxaga talked about 3 types of landscapes, I was thinking of the fourth one, which is The Wasteland by T.H. Eliot and Greg Gatsby's Wasteland in Fitzgerald's text. So I was wondering now, in the 21st century, is it a fourth type of a landscape in literature?
Hiru paisaia motari buruz hitz egin duzula, hiru paisaia motari buruz hitz egin duzula, baina itzulpena ez du funtzionatzen eta ez dizugu ulertzen galdera konkretua. Barkatu. Esan behar dut, orain hor goian irakurleanen unea edo...
I don't know why she's not listening to translation, sorry. So maybe later when we now meet, because after this talk we are meeting to sign books. So if you want, we can try to give you an answer there. And it is about time we call this conference. So thank you very much, Hasier. Thank you, Bernardo.